The Tibet Museum in Dharamshala is a gateway to our Tibetan history and culture. From its historical period of the Tibetan Empire in the 7th century to the institution of the Dalai Lamas. From the Chinese occupation in the early 50s to the clandestine CIA operations in Tibet. And then you have the exodus of Tibetan refugees in exile in India and the rebuilding of Tibetan lives. Well, there are so many things to discover and so little time. So today, we head to the Tibet Museum in Dharamshala, India. The Tibet Museum is situated right in the middle of the central Tibetan administration, which is the Tibetan government in exile. It's a 10 to 15 minutes taxi ride from McLeod Ganj. Once you enter the gate from the main road, you will come across different department buildings in the central Tibetan administration. The museum is located next to the Tibetan library. I'll make a separate video on this, but for now, let's enter the museum. Sorry to interrupt the video, I have a quick favor to ask. Many of you who watch the videos are not subscribed to the channel, so I would really appreciate if you could subscribe to the channel. This will push the video, reach more wider audience, and therefore I would really appreciate if you could subscribe to the channel. So back to the video. Right across when you enter the hall is the 3D model of the topography of Tibet. Did you know that the Mount Kailash in Tibet is not only sacred to the Tibetans and Hindus, but it is also the source of many of Asia's rivers like the Brahmaputra, Indus, Mekong, Salween, Yangtze and Yellow River. Therefore, saving Tibet is also safeguarding many of these countries whose livelihood and security depend on these rivers. The first section is dedicated to the cultural aspect. You have these traditional clothes put up by the Tibetans from the 3 traditional provinces of Tibet. And then you have this wall explaining the pre-Buddhist indigenous religion and the different sects of Buddhism that people follow. The traditional staple diet of Tibetans is tsampa or the barley, since not many vegetation grow at this high altitude. You have these leather pockets to store the tsampa and the bowls in which we consume our barley. Moving on to the Tibetan language and literature section, I was surprised to see a Remington Tibetan typewriter which was made in exile. Some of these items like this trunk were donated by individuals to the museum. And now we come to the most important section of the museum for me personally, because we have the timeline of the history of Tibet and its rulers from the early 7th century until the Chinese brutal occupation of the Tibet in 1959. Some of the displays will really make you think about Tibet in a whole different way. The National Geographic magazine in 1934 published the Tibetan flag along with other independent nations. Did you know that prior to the Chinese occupation we have our own language, currency, army, flag and even a passport to travel overseas? This was the uniform of our Tibetan army before the Chinese occupation. Then we have a whole section dedicated to the life and legacies of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. And one of the interesting parts of the section is the Q&A section, where His Holiness addresses these interesting questions in a very short, succinct way. As the section suggests, these shed a light on the set of events from the 17-point agreement between Tibet and China in 1951 to the brutal occupation of Tibet in March 1959, leading to the Chinese bombing of the Nobulinga Palace of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. These events eventually led to the inevitable escape of His Holiness into India, followed by the mass killing of Tibetans and the destruction of monasteries. And during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, Tibet was no different. Anything that resonated or identified our unique Tibetan culture was shredded and destroyed. Buddhist scriptures and figures were smashed and burned. And when the 10th Panchen Lama wrote a 70,000-character petition to the Chinese government, he was subjected to the public humiliation and put in jail. And when general public resisted these hardcore measures like Ama Ade and Geshe Losang Pande, they were beaten, electrocuted and tortured in jails. Next section is one of the very few chapters of our contemporary history that many don't know about. When China was invading from the eastern part of Tibet in the mid-50s, influential Tibetan merchants and patriots formed an organization to resist the Chinese armed forces. They sought the CIA's help, and many of the resistant fighters were trained by the CIA in Colorado, US, and later dropped them into Tibet. The CIA operation ended abruptly due to the shift in US foreign policy, particularly after Nixon's visit to China in the early 70s. There's a movie by a Tibetan filmmaker, Champagne Kimsar, on the subject called 4 Rivers, 6 Ranges, which has just been released. In 2008, the Tibetan people inside Tibet started organizing anti-government protests, creating a ripple effect all over Tibet. And since then, many new creative organic protests emerged, like the Tsamba Revolution or Hakka movement. With the deteriorating situation inside Tibet, many resorted to self-immolation to highlight the situation. More than 150 Tibetans have self-immolated inside Tibet. The 6th section tells you about the ways in which Tibetans escape into exile. And there's one incident which captured the global attention, that is the Nangpala shooting. When a group of Tibetans were escaping into India while trekking over the Himalayas, some mountaineers witnessed the Chinese forces shooting and killing few of the people in the group. This happened at the Nangpala Pass. That is how Tibetans escaped China's control by walking over the Himalayas into Nepal and India. There's also a map that shows the route which His Holiness the Dalai Lama took when he escaped into India. Tibetans put their life at risk when crossing the Himalayas. Many die, and some suffer frostbite and endure great hardships before reaching into exile. And finally, we made it to the exile section. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in his autobiography, My Land and My People, described the moment he reached the Indian border. He felt he could breathe freedom. The government of India, headed by the Prime Minister Nehru, and the people of India received His Holiness and the Tibetan refugees with open arms. Tibetans coming into exile were first put up at these 2 camps, Misamari in Assam and Buxa in West Bengal, before sending them to the other parts of the country. And since India had won independence a couple of years ago in 1947, and with the challenges at hand, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama didn't want to burden the already struggling new nation, and therefore many Tibetans worked as road construction labourers to be self-reliant. You would be surprised to know that many of the roads in the border regions in Ladakh, Sikkim and Himachal were initially built by the Tibetan refugees. Later, with the help of Indian government and many of the international agencies, Tibetan refugees slowly starting to rebuild their lives by building schools, monasteries and Tibetan settlements. The Tibetan government in exile was also set up in 1959 to further the Tibet's issue and seek support from the international fraternity. Let me take this opportunity to thank the Government of India and its people for their continued support to our cause. Tibetans continued to build their lives in exile with the establishment of schools, social and cultural institutions. These institutions were pivotal in preserving Tibetan culture and traditions for the coming new generation of Tibetans in exile. I guess we have reached to the end of the first hall, which was mostly related to the history of Tibet before and after the Chinese invasion. And now we head to the other side of the hall, which is a bit of a more nuanced and sort of gives you a peek into what it is being a Tibetan, and also shines a light on how rich Tibet is when it comes to minerals and natural resources. These are some of the contemporary Tibetan writers, and this one particular writer named Gendun Chempe is one of the most revered contemporary writers who has been an inspiration to many. Did you know that a Tibetan physician Omji Yeshitundela was awarded the Padma Shri Award, India's highest civilian honour? He played a pivotal role in the re-establishment of the Tibetan Medical College in exile, and in his later years, his treatment of cancer patients earned him a lot of appreciation and accolades. This section gives you a peek into how rich Tibet is when it comes to minerals and natural resources. It is not only rich in chromium, copper and gold, but it has a huge reserve of lithium, which is crucial for EV batteries these days. China's incessant building of dams, mining and extraction of these natural resources is a huge concern, and I hope the international community is paying attention. I know it's a lot to take in, so if you need a little break or respite, you can listen to the Tibetan artists, from the traditional to modern pop artists. Anyway, we only have one last section to go, so I'll try to keep it brief. Towards the end of the hall, the Tibet Museum regularly organizes different exhibition themes, and today they are showcasing the 75th anniversary of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's assumption of both spiritual and political leadership of Tibet at the age of 16. The exhibition showcases the biography of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and the legacies. These walls are the testament of his resilience, vision, and his commitment to champion the cause of Tibet. These are the list of countries he visited in his lifetime and the honorary doctorate degrees he received. Of the many awards and accolades, you have these three most important replicas here: the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989, the US Congressional Medal in 2006, and the Templeton Prize in 2012. He also initiated the Mind and Life Conferences, which is essentially a dialogue platform for both scientists and practitioners. So here we are at the end of the tour of the Tibet Museum. I hope you enjoyed the tour, and on your way out, you can check out some of the merchandise. So we've reached the end of the tour. I hope you really enjoy watching this tour of the Tibet Museum in Dharamshala. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. And I would really appreciate if you could comment down below your favorite part of the section of the museum. And if there's any story that you want me to cover, do let me know in the comment section below. So see you in the next video. And folks, if you're in Dharamshala, make sure you visit the museum. Anyway, if you're new to the channel, do subscribe and support the channel. It means a lot to me. So see you in the next video. Until then, take care.